It was a quiet, lonely life. I worked from home, lived by myself, and the days blended together in a blur of emails, takeout, and Netflix. That's why I decided to adopt a dog. I'd always wanted one but had never felt like the timing was right. Now, though, something inside me just clicked. Maybe a dog was what I needed to shake things up a bit. After days of scrolling through profiles on adoption websites, I came across a scruffy, mixed-breed dog with a face that made me pause. He had big, brown eyes that were warm yet intense, like he was watching the world carefully and taking everything in. His name was Charlie. When I met him, he trotted over with cautious curiosity, sniffed my hand, then sat right beside me as if he'd already decided we were a team. It was love at first sight. When we got home, he was a little unsure but quickly adapted, trailing me from room to room. It felt good to have some company in the house, especially when it was as quiet as mine. But I quickly noticed that there were parts of the house Charlie didn't like. The living room, specifically the corner near the old, heavy bookshelf, seemed to unsettle him. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he just sensed something there, an odd smell or a draft. I tried to ignore the unease that settled in my stomach every time I saw him staring, tense and wary, at that spot. But as days turned into weeks, Charlie's behavior in the house only grew stranger. Charlie and I quickly settled into a routine. He was a calm, gentle dog who would sit beside me while I worked or curl up at the foot of my bed at night. Having him around was comforting, especially when I heard the strange creaks and groans that an old house like mine tended to make. It made me feel like I had someone there with me, even if it was just a dog. But certain things started happening that I couldn't explain. I'd find Charlie in the living room, fixated on the bookshelf, sometimes for hours. His ears would perk up, and his body would grow tense. It was almost as if he was seeing something I couldn't. Occasionally, he would growl a low, quiet rumble that seemed to vibrate through the room. "Charlie, what is it?" I'd ask, trying to get his attention, but he would just ignore me, his focus never wavering. And it wasn't just the staring. Charlie seemed to avoid certain areas of the house entirely. He would stop at the foot of the staircase, refusing to go up unless I went first, and he avoided the hallway outside the bathroom as if it were dangerous. I brushed it off as quirks of his personality. After all, dogs can be funny about certain things, right? But as the weeks went on, the quirks became harder to ignore. One night, I was lying in bed, just on the edge of sleep, when I heard a creak from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but then I heard another creak, and another. They sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway toward my room. I lay there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then Charlie, who had been lying at the foot of my bed, suddenly stood up, his gaze fixed on the doorway, his body tense. He started growling, his lips pulling back in a way that sent a chill down my spine. Charlie wasn't usually a barker, but his growl was deep and guttural, a sound I had never heard him make before. He was staring at the empty doorway, his gaze unwavering. "Charlie?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I slowly turned my head to look at the doorway, but there was nothing there, just the darkness of the hallway beyond. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just out of sight. After a few minutes, Charlie seemed to relax, lying back down with a sigh. I lay there, too scared to close my eyes, listening to the silence. Eventually, I drifted off, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences became more frequent. Shadows would flicker at the edge of my vision, only to disappear when I turned my head. I'd hear faint whispers, so soft they were barely audible, but unmistakably there. Sometimes I'd hear my name, as if someone were standing just behind me, calling me in a hushed, almost pleading tone. One afternoon, while washing dishes, I saw a shadow move across the kitchen wall. It was quick, a fleeting blur, but it made me freeze. Charlie, who was lying in the doorway, raised his head, his eyes following the movement as if he could see it too. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. The kitchen was empty, the house silent. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish but unable to help myself. The only response was the soft hum of the refrigerator and Charlie's quiet, uneasy whine. One evening, while dusting the bookshelf in the living room, I found an old, faded photograph tucked between two books. It was a black and white portrait of a man in his 50s, dressed in a suit, with a serious, almost scowling expression. His eyes seemed to bore into mine, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of recognition. I turned the photo over, hoping to find some information about the man, but there was nothing. Just the faded image of a stern-looking man who had once, apparently, called this house his home. I placed the photo back on the shelf, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, his gaze following me even as I walked away. That night, I dreamt of the man in the photo. In the dream, he was standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. I tried to move, to scream, but I was paralyzed, trapped in the nightmare. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. Charlie was lying beside me, his eyes wide and alert, as if he'd sensed my fear. The next day, I decided to do some research. I hadn't thought much about the history of the house when I bought it, but now, with everything that had been happening, I felt an urgent need to know more. I found an old article from a local newspaper. It was about a man named James Carter, the previous owner of the house, who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances nearly 30 years ago. The article described him as a reclusive man, known for his odd habits and paranoid behavior. Neighbors reported hearing him mutter about someone in the shadows and how he felt watched in his own home. The police had conducted an investigation, but they found no evidence of foul play. Eventually, the case went cold and James Carter was never seen or heard from again. A chill ran down my spine as I read the article. Could the man in the photo be James Carter? Was his spirit still lingering in the house, trapped, unable to move on? I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny the growing unease that had settled over me since moving in. And Charlie seemed to sense it too, his reactions, his strange behavior. It was as if he knew there was something in the house, something unseen and menacing. One night, after yet another sleepless night filled with whispers and shadows, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the living room, Charlie at my side, and stood in front of the bookshelf, the place where Charlie seemed most uneasy. "If there's someone here," I said, my voice shaking, "please, let us live in peace. We don't mean you any harm." As soon as the words left my mouth, the temperature in the room dropped. A cold, heavy silence settled over us, pressing down like a weight. Charlie started barking, his eyes wide with fear, his body rigid as he stared at the corner by the bookshelf. I felt a presence behind me, a chilling, malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. I could feel it, a cold breath on the back of my neck, as if someone were standing right behind me, close enough to touch. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just an empty room, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Leave us alone." The coldness receded and the room returned to normal, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I knew, deep down, that whatever was haunting the house hadn't left. It was still there, watching, waiting. The culmination came a few nights later. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard footsteps in the hallway again. This time, they were louder, more insistent, as if someone were pacing back and forth just outside my door. Charlie leapt off the bed, his hackles raised, his growl low and menacing. He stood at the door, staring into the darkness, his body tense and alert. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. And then, I heard it, a soft whisper, so close it was as if someone were standing right beside me. "Get out." Charlie let out a fierce, guttural bark, lunging at the doorway as if he could see something there, something I couldn't. His barking filled the room, echoing off the walls, and I felt a surge of warmth, a protective energy that seemed to push back against the darkness. The coldness faded, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the presence was gone. Charlie let out a soft whine, his body relaxing as he turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a calm determination. I knelt down, wrapping my arms around him, grateful for his courage, for his unwavering loyalty.